Paul grew up in a small village in rural Africa, the son of a poor farmer. Life was hard, and the family often went without basic necessities. While others in his community seemed to accept their lot in life, Paul harbored a deep resentment for the poverty that surrounded him. From a young age, he vowed to rise above it all, to one day live a life of wealth and luxury. Paul's charm and intelligence set him apart. His sharp mind and eloquence earned him admiration from his peers and elders alike. As he grew older, Paul discovered the power of persuasion. His words could inspire or manipulate, and he began dreaming of a way to use this gift to achieve his ambition. "God has a plan for me," he often told his family, though his real plan was to leave the village and make a name for himself. One evening, while walking alone through the forest near his village, Paul encountered a cloaked figure standing in his path. The man's voice was smooth and commanding. "I've been watching you, Paul," he said. "I know your desires. Wealth, power, respect, they can all be yours." Paul froze, unsure whether to run or listen. The man continued, "I can give you everything you want. All I ask in return is your loyalty." Desperation outweighed caution, and Paul agreed without hesitation. In that moment, his fate was sealed. The cloaked man handed Paul a ceremonial dagger and instructed him to find a white goat for a ritual. "This is a symbol of innocence corrupted," the man explained. Under the light of the full moon, Paul completed the ritual, spilling the goat's blood onto the earth as the man chanted. As the ritual ended, Paul felt a surge of energy course through his body. The man drew a symbol on the ground and instructed Paul to kneel within it. "Your rise begins here," the man said. "But remember, your soul is no longer your own." Months later, Paul moved to the city and rebranded himself as Pastor Paul. He rented a small hall and began preaching, blending traditional Christian teachings with his own fiery rhetoric. His sermons emphasized prosperity, wealth, and success. Within weeks, people flocked to his services, drawn by his charisma and promises of blessings. Paul claimed to heal the sick and perform miracles, and his church, Gospel Prosperity Ministries, quickly grew in popularity. Paul's reputation spread like wildfire. His congregation expanded, attracting the wealthy and influential. His sermons were dramatic and captivating, filled with promises of divine intervention for those who gave generously. The church's offerings poured in, allowing Paul to purchase a larger building. He adorned it with golden altars, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers. The congregation marveled at the splendor, believing it was a sign of God's favor. One night, the cloaked man appeared in Paul's dream. "You're doing well," he said, "but remember our deal. Lead them away from God and toward me." Paul nodded, his ambition blinding him to the true cost of his actions. The man then revealed the next step in their covenant. Paul needed to conduct rituals involving his congregation. Their faith must be redirected, mock the divine, and turn their worship toward you. Paul began incorporating subtle mockery of God into his sermons. He questioned traditional teachings, portraying Jesus as weak and outdated. "God doesn't want you to live in poverty," he declared. "He wants you to prosper, but you must give to receive." The congregation, eager for blessings, laughed at his jokes and gave generously. They saw no harm in Paul's unorthodox teachings, believing he was guiding them toward a better life. The cloaked man demanded more sacrifices to sustain Paul's power. He instructed Paul to invite his most devoted followers to midnight prayer sessions. These sessions, he claimed, would seal their blessings. Paul led the chosen congregants through strange rituals, chanting unfamiliar words and offering symbolic items. One by one, the attendees began to disappear, their families left with no answers. Paul assured the congregation that they had been called to a higher purpose. While Gospel Prosperity Ministries thrived, its members suffered silently. Marriages crumbled, children fell ill, and businesses collapsed. Yet, Paul always had an explanation. "The devil is testing your faith," he would say. "Give more, and your breakthrough will come." Despite their misery, the congregation clung to Paul's words, believing their sacrifices were necessary for future blessings. They didn't realize their suffering was feeding the darkness that empowered Paul. Among the congregation, whispers of unease began to spread. Families noticed a pattern. Those closest to Paul often faced the worst tragedies. Martha, a widow, grew suspicious after her son vanished. She confided in a neighbor, but they warned her to stay silent. Fear kept the congregation in line. Even those who doubted Paul were too afraid to confront him, worried about the consequences of questioning the man of God. Sophie, a journalist known for exposing corruption, heard rumors about Gospel Prosperity Ministries. Families of missing members reached out to her, sharing their stories of tragedy and loss. Intrigued, Sophie began attending services undercover. Sophie noticed the eerie atmosphere of the church. Despite its grandeur, the congregation seemed weary and broken. She listened to Paul's sermons, finding them unsettling. Determined to uncover the truth, she started digging deeper. During one service, Sophie managed to sneak away and explore the church's lower levels. She stumbled upon a locked door radiating an aura of dread. Picking the lock, she entered a room filled with disturbing items: jars of blood, photographs of missing members, and strange symbols painted on the walls. Sophie took photos and left quickly, her heart pounding. "This is worse than I imagined," she whispered to herself. She knew she had uncovered something far more sinister than a simple scam. Paul's closest aides knew of his practices but remained silent out of fear or greed. They helped organize the midnight rituals and managed the church's wealth. Some justified their actions as loyalty, while others were too deep in to escape. Samuel, Paul's right-hand man, began to question his role. The guilt of luring innocent people to their doom weighed heavily on him. He considered reaching out for help but feared Paul's wrath and the mysterious force he served. Grace, an elderly woman known for her spiritual insight, confronted Paul during a service. "You've led these people into darkness," she said. "Repent before it's too late." Paul dismissed her as a relic of outdated faith. That night, Grace was found dead, under mysterious circumstances. Though no one could prove it, many suspected Paul's involvement. Her warning lingered in the minds of those who had heard it, planting seeds of doubt. Sophie began interviewing former members of Gospel Prosperity Ministries, piecing together a timeline of disappearances and tragedies. Each story reinforced her suspicions that Paul was involved in something far darker than financial exploitation. Her investigation uncovered financial records showing massive donations from families who later fell into ruin. She prepared her exposé, knowing it would shake the city to its core. Sophie's exposé was published, revealing the shocking rituals, disappearances, and suffering behind Gospel Prosperity Ministries. Photographs from the Forbidden Room and testimonies from victims' families sparked outrage across the nation. Paul's congregation erupted in chaos. Many members left the church, horrified by the revelations. Paul tried to dismiss the exposé as lies from jealous outsiders, but his grip on the congregation was slipping. The once packed church quickly emptied as more members left. Families who had long suffered in silence began speaking out, sharing stories of manipulation and loss. The faces of the missing congregants were plastered on news channels, and their families demanded answers. Despite his remaining wealth, Paul began to feel the walls closing in. The authorities launched an investigation into the church, and he knew it was only a matter of time before his secrets were fully exposed. For the first time since making the covenant, Paul felt true fear, not of the law, but of the entity he had served. Desperate to regain his power, Paul performed the ultimate ritual. The cloaked man demanded a human sacrifice to seal their bond and restore Paul's influence. Paul chose one of his most devoted followers, a young woman named Esther, who believed she was being called for a special blessing. Under the cover of darkness, Paul led Esther to his villa, where the ritual took place. As the ceremony began, the cloaked man appeared and demanded Paul complete the sacrifice himself. Trembling, Paul raised the ceremonial dagger, but at the last moment Esther cried out, "God, save me!" Her cry seemed to shatter the atmosphere, and the cloaked man roared in fury. The failed ritual marked the beginning of Paul's rapid downfall. His remaining wealth vanished mysteriously. Bank accounts emptied, and his properties were seized. His health deteriorated further, his body covered in sores that no doctor could explain. Paul's once commanding presence was reduced to a broken, paranoid shell of a man. Even the few loyal congregants left him, terrified of the darkness that seemed to follow him. The church building itself became desolate, its golden altars tarnished and its halls eerily silent. The cloaked man appeared one final time, laughing as he declared, "Your soul is mine. This was always the price." With nowhere left to turn, Paul sought out Sophie and confessed everything. He revealed the truth about his pact with the devil, the sacrifices, and the rituals. Sophie recorded his confession and shared it with the public, sparking further outrage. Paul's admission led to his arrest. As he was taken into custody, he muttered, "It wasn't worth it." None of it was worth it. His words were broadcast across the nation, cementing his legacy as a cautionary tale of greed and deception. A group of spiritual leaders gathered to cleanse Gospel Prosperity Ministries. They prayed, fasted, and performed rituals to banish the dark forces that lingered in the building. The opulent decorations were stripped away, replaced with simple furnishings that reflected humility and true faith. The church was renamed and rededicated as a sanctuary for healing and repentance. It became a beacon of hope, attracting those who had been hurt by Paul's deception and offering them a place to rebuild their faith. Sophie's exposé became a global phenomenon, inspiring countless others to stand against corruption and false prophets. Her book about the church's rise and fall became a bestseller, with all proceeds donated to the victims of Gospel Prosperity Ministries. Meanwhile, the families of the missing congregants finally received justice as the truth came to light. Though their pain could never be erased, they found solace in knowing that Paul's reign of terror was over. In prison, Paul began to seek redemption. He wrote letters to the families of his victims, apologizing for his actions and begging for forgiveness. He spent his days fasting and praying, hoping to reconcile with God before his death. While many refused to forgive him, a few saw his sincerity and prayed for his soul. Paul became a man consumed by guilt, but his remorse was genuine. Though his fate was uncertain, his attempts at redemption offered a glimmer of humanity in his otherwise dark legacy. Paul's death came quietly, his body found lifeless in his cell. Guards reported that he had whispered a prayer before taking his last breath, asking for mercy and peace. For the first time in years, his face appeared serene. The new church flourished, becoming a symbol of restoration and hope. Families who had suffered found healing, and Sophie's work inspired a movement against exploitation in religious spaces. Paul's story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of greed and the enduring power of truth and faith.